I hope you've had a good week flying. Kind of a slow week for me. I did a couple of early morning trips to Nashville, did a trip down to Dallas Love. That's always fun to go down there and get some good barbecue or something like that. Something I want to talk about, and that's something that happened to me when I was instructing. A student and I were in a Cessna 152 about to take off on runway 36. Tower had us holding short for landing traffic. I'm looking out to the right, and there's a Skylane out there. And, I'm just looking at it, waiting to go. We're all set. And I'm thinking, it just doesn't, something's not right. And as he comes across it, something clicks. His gear's up. I grabbed the mic. Cessna landing 36, gears up. Nothing. Cessna landing 36, your gear is up. By now, he's into the flare there. Suddenly clicks with tower, what's going on? And the guy calls the guy's in number. Cessna so-and-so, go around. Nothing. He is dissipating his energy in that flare right now. Beautiful flare. Cessna so-and-so, go around. As he says go around, you see the smoke and sparks coming out of the bottom of that Skylane. Bottom of this aircraft's just being eaten away by the asphalt. Guy comes to a stop. The next thing you hear on the radio is the guy that's flying the Skylane saying, Tower, Cessna so-and-so, the Eagle's wings are clipped. Well, it happens. He's not the first guy. So the tower, they call Fireball, get the crash and rescue trucks rolling out. The guy clears us to taxi across the runway we were going to take off on and to another runway, and we head out to the practice area. When we finally come back, they're loading the airplane onto a flatbed, pulling it off the runway. A couple of months go by, the airplane's all finished up, and we have this guy come in. And I talked to him, and he's got to take a 609 ride with the FAA. Well, for those of you that are not familiar with it, a 609 is now called a 709 ride, and that's where you have to demonstrate why you should be able to keep your certificates. Obviously, they're going to take certificate action against this gentleman. All this guy has to do is he has to go out with an FAA safety inspector and demonstrate that he can safely do the pattern. He's going to have to do it in a complex aircraft because the incident that he was involved in was a gear-up landing. So he's got to demonstrate that he can safely do the pattern, do the checklist, lower the gear. Not too complicated, not a big deal. But he's got to get some instruction first before he goes out, and I was the guy that was going to do it. So we talk a little bit more, and it turns out this guy was the guy that I had called on the radio that had landed gear up right in front of us. I asked him about this. I said, man, I saw you. I called you twice on the radio. And then the tower called you. What was going on? He said he was so focused on that landing that he had just pretty much tuned it out. He never heard anybody on the radio till after he had landed gear up and come to a stop. And I guess what had happened was he had tunnel vision. You lose your situational awareness when you have tunnel vision. That's something to watch out for as pilots. It's easy to do. You concentrate on that ILS, you concentrate on that landing, lose track of what's going on around you. I told the guy before we left, I said, let's go out to this airport out here to the east, and we'll do the pattern 3 times, and I'm just going to observe. I want to see what you're doing, and then we'll pull off to the side and talk about it. If you're doing everything great, that's great. If you aren't, then we'll discuss it. So we do the pattern. Oh, before we even get there, we're flying along, and I notice he's adjusting the throttle with these 3 fingers. He's missing this part of his hand. And so I asked, I said, where'd you leave your fingers? Oh yeah, I was hand propping my airplane and got caught by the prop. Right off. And I'm thinking to myself, oh my gosh, I see a pattern developing here. But I thought, well, that's really sad. That's unfortunate. So we fly out there and do the pattern 3 times. Boom, boom, boom. And I said, okay, let's pull over and talk. We need to talk. There were a couple of things that were very evident that were a problem. The first was he never used the checklist. The second was, if you're not going to do the checklist, at least do everything at the same time, at the same point, in the same logical sequence in the pattern, so that one thing leads to another. Flaps approach entering the pattern, beam the numbers on the downwind, gear down, turning final, flaps to full. But you basically see what I'm saying. It's a logical sequence that is reinforced with memory. I'm saying use the checklist, but if you aren't, you better have that down. He didn't do anything in the same sequence at all. It was always at a different point. Whenever it just came to his mind. At one point, he put the flaps in and then put the gear immediately down. Another one, he put the gear down, and then at some point as he was turning, he put in some flaps and did everything. Nothing was done in a logical sequence, and it wasn't done at the same point in the pattern every time. Every pattern was totally different. So we discussed that. I told him that right there is an invitation to making a mistake. You know, you got to use that checklist. So this fellow, he goes out and he rides with the safety inspector, does the pattern a couple of times, puts down the gear, and finishes up. Unfortunately, many years later, I'd heard that he was involved in an accident. He was the only person in the airplane, and that pretty much finished him. The checklist is not a do list. It's a check of items that should be accomplished in a logical sequence. And I'm looking at you people out there, and I know there are guys out there that say, I've got it memorized, I don't need to do that, I got it all down. Yeah, you know, there are guys like that, and I can't make somebody use a checklist. But what I would say to them, if you absolutely refuse to use this checklist, and it's not a do list, it's a checklist, then you especially need to be doing everything in a logical sequence at the same point every time. Because the checklist itself, one thing that it does to us that we don't really talk about is the fact that it develops in a habit that we will fall back onto if something happens. Because you could be in a situation by yourself or something going on where you don't have time to grab that checklist. You've got both hands full just flying that airplane. Or for some reason or another, you may not be able to get to it. In that case, what you're going to fall back on is going to be your training and what you do as habit. And that checklist develops that habit. You're doing the same thing every single time. Enter the pattern at a 45 degree, flaps approach. Cross the beam point of the runway on the downwind, gear down. Every airplane is different. You know what your airplane is different, but you know how the sequence goes and you know where to do things. It's very important to establish those safety habits. So my question to you is, have you ever almost landed gear up or had a gear up landing? Have you ever been with anybody or flown with anybody who was involved in a gear up landing? Just curious about that and what your experiences are. You know, if you've got something to say, just put it down in the comments down there. If you want to see any more videos, click subscribe.